Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about our relationships with the human, more than human, and celestial. I'm Emily.
I'm Aryn.
And I'm Dani.
Today, we're recording our Sagittarius season discussion on Friday, December 20th, just before the solstice, the day before the winter solstice, year 2024. And we want to have our listeners and our friends and our community here get to know us a little bit better. So we're going to share our big three, which in astrology, the big three is your sun, moon, and rising sign. And so I am a Taurus sun, a Gemini moon, and a Leo rising.
Capricorn sun, Capricorn rising, and Taurus moon.
What are your two pronouns as well? We should make sure.
My pronouns are they, them.
And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. This is Dani. My pronouns are she with a capital S. And my sun is in Aries, and my moon is in Pisces, and my rising is in Libra. But in Placidus, Pluto is in my first house. I feel it's important to make sure that's clear. Cool. Well, I think I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this segment. So this podcast is divided, our idea is that we're going to do 2 episodes per month. And one of them is the Soul Connections interview segment, which we'll be doing interviews of people in our community of all different backgrounds and things that we're interested in and they're interested in. And then this segment is called Astro Church. So Astro Church is, it comes from a space that my Milwaukee community had in 2019. It was a River West radio show at some point, and now it's evolved into being a segment on Soul Connections podcast, which is really exciting. And Astro Church is born from the idea that much of what I craved about having community, I found in radical church spaces, specifically the All People's Church, led by Pastor Steve Jerby back in the day. And it was just really inspiring to me. I also was working with a woman, Maria Hamilton, who is an activist and mother in Milwaukee. And she, is a very religious person and faithful person, and she really inspired me. I was somebody who didn't grow up with religion. I grew up with religion around me, and it feeling like ostracized because I didn't go to church and told mean things by people who were claiming to be Christian. And these people, Pastor Steve and Maria, and the whole Hamilton family, honestly, they really showed me how belief and spirituality and can bring people together and can be something that can be experienced in an infinite amount of ways. It doesn't just have to be what was prescribed. So Astro Church was born from the idea that those of us that aren't necessarily with a specific religious affiliation, but that are into astrology and and are spiritual beings, as we all are. I am a Pisces moon, so I think we all are in some form of us, spiritual being, and can come together around astrology and be able to connect with what's going on in the world from that lens. So that's kind of what Astro Church is about. It's a space. We use story, we use archetype, and we talk about the real stuff, the politics in the context of our world, and also how we feel. So yeah, Aryn, do you want to talk about what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so in this episode of Astro Church, we're going to be talking about Sagittarius season, which is almost over. We're going to be discussing Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, and Pluto, especially as they relate to each other. Our tarot connection today is the 8 of Swords, and the big themes that we're going to touch on are power, belief, and friendship. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily for the universal shoutouts.
Thanks, Aryn. So Universal Shoutouts is the part of Astro Church where we are holding space for people, for communities, for all the different events that are unfolding across the globe at the moment. So to open universal shoutouts, let's all take a deep breath in through our nose and exhale out through our mouths. And so in future Astro Church episodes, we invite our listeners to make comments on YouTube, send us a message on Instagram, who you and what you're holding space for, so that we can include your universal shoutouts in our future episodes. So would anyone like to open up our universal shoutouts today?
I have two. So one of them is to my teenage self, because it's a part of me that I've had a complicated relationship with for a long time, but with Wicked coming out, and we're going to get into some Wicked stuff today. I just have been reconnecting with her in a really deep way, and I just want to tell her she's awesome. She's not just cheesy and bossy. She's actually really smart and cool. So I want to give a universal shout out to her. Universal shout out. And then my second one is for all the people that put effort into getting the Michigan Senate, I think it was, or the House in Michigan, the state legislative body, to reject sending state money to the Copperwood project that would deeply impact the Great Lakes and indigenous rights, as well as all of our fresh water. And it's a huge deal, not just for those of us in the Great Lakes region. It's a huge deal because the Great Lakes are 21% of the entire world's fresh water. It's like they are one of the most sacred resources that we have on this planet. And I just, anybody who really understands that and, puts effort into protecting them, I just want to give them all the love and support today. Universal shout out.
Thanks, Dani. Really appreciate the honoring of, inner child, inner teen, and the water defenders and the protectors. I love the Great Lakes so much, and I'm so blessed to live in their region. So my universal shout out today is for everyone who is suffering through grief and loss, especially around this holiday season. Anyone who has lost someone near and dear to them, especially around this time of year. My family, we unexpectedly lost my uncle, who is my godfather, my mom's brother, my Uncle Brian. We unexpectedly lost him 2 days before Thanksgiving. And it's been really hard on my family. And so I'm just really feeling into losing someone that you love that's really a close part of your community or family unit or friend group. And I just want to hold space for everyone who's grieving the loss of their loved ones, and how that grief can really be intensified, especially this time of year around the holidays when, supposedly we're supposed to be celebrating and feeling merry and bright. And that's just not the case for a lot of people who are struggling through loss. So I'm sending a universal shout out to everyone who's grieving the loss of loved ones.
Thank you for that, Emily. My universal shout out, I think, builds really well off of yours. I'm thinking about the people, specifically the working class people of America, and especially around the holiday season, how it can be really hard for service industry workers or people who are paid hourly. So I'm just thinking a lot about them and my new comrades at my new job, and the conversations we've been having about how it's challenging in capitalism. So I'm thinking about them, and also how it can feel difficult to have to work on holidays just in general, and to also witness other people not having to do that. So I'm thinking about those folks. Universal shout out to them.
Universal
Shout out.
I do wanna throw one more in for the Amazon workers going on strike right now. Universal shout out.
Power to the Amazon workers.
Power to the Amazon workers.
All right. So we'll conclude our universal shout outs with another deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouths. And I would like to invite Dani to transition us into our story time segment today.
So I'm going to just read the story, but I just want to tell everyone that is listening to this episode that if you have not seen the musical or movie of Wicked, this whole episode will contain spoilers for both things. They should be pretty similar to each other. So if you haven't seen the movie, but you've seen the musical or you know the story, it shouldn't be a big deal. But if you don't know anything about it, then you might get some spoilers for that story. Once upon a time, in a land of emerald cities and glittering spires, two unlikely people became besties. One born green, her differences feared and shunned by a world that could not understand her. The other gleamed like the sun, radiant and beloved, carrying the effortless grace of privilege. In this magical land, animals spoke with human voices, and for a time, all creatures lived together in harmony. But the peace began to fracture when a ruler from a distant place rose to power. Grand in gesture, and in words, he cloaked his greed in spectacle and scapegoating. A fraud with no true magic, he cast shadows of fear to hide his inadequacies, turning humans and animals against one another. Our two companions met at school, a grand academy where the chosen were groomed for greatness. At first, the two clashed, our green hero bold and unyielding in her convictions, and our sunlit starlet charming and eager to please. Yet, in the sacred quiet of sleepover secrets and mirrored dances, a friendship grew, as their differences wove a fragile bond of shared longing and unspoken dreams, of happiness, acceptance, and of a better world, a world where all of Oz's creatures lived freely and at peace. You see, the outcast friend saw the truth, the cruelty enacted upon the animal population, the violence of silencing their voices, of extracting their power. She knew that justice could not wait. Yet her companion disagreed, believing that she could charm and sway those in power without shattering the fragile world that she had always known. As the bombastic ruler tightened his grasp, the green one chose defiance. She stepped beyond the boundaries drawn for her, refusing to bow to a system that demanded her complicity. Her rebellion came at a great cost. She became a pariah, a name whispered with fear and disdain. Her companion, torn, lingered in the safety of her golden world. She loved her friend, yet the weight of comfort and belonging was holding her down. She clung to the hope that change could be made without upheaval, even as the chasm between herself and the person she loved most in the world widened into an abyss. On a windswept rooftop, our green hero was left alone. In that moment, she understood. She could not be complicit any longer with a world that was so far outside the one she believed to be possible. With a cry that now echoes through generations, she rose into the sky, not just defying gravity, but the weight of every belief that sought to contain her. Below, the Golden One watched, her heart a tumult of awe and sorrow, admiration and fear. Would she cling to the cages of comfort or rise to meet her friend in the sky? You want to talk about our tarot connection, Aryn?
Absolutely. So our tarot connection for today is the Eight of Swords, and this card is from the deck, the Modern Witch Tarot deck by Lisa Sterle, which is a really great modern reinterpretation of some classic Rider-Waite imagery. So the swords corresponds to air, which is associated with words, communication, and ideas. Also perception, beliefs, feelings. And in this card, there's a figure depicted trapped by literally bound in rope, and also there's blindfold over their eye. So this card really challenges and pushes us to question who's writing the stories that we're living, where do we inherit these stories? How much power do we give these stories? I like to think of this idea of we can write our narratives or narratives can write us, which it feels really poignant with the story that you just shared, Dani. This card also brings up this idea of self-restriction. Who was the one who bound us? Was it ourselves? Was it other people? Oftentimes we inherit belief systems, and it's up to us to have agency to either accept or reject those ideas. There can also be illusions that bind us that aren't entirely true. This card is also associated with Gemini and also with Jupiter, which is really interesting because Jupiter is in Gemini right now. And this placement is considered detriment according to traditional astrology, where some planets have more access to resources in certain signs versus others. And I think it makes sense that Jupiter's in detriment in Gemini because Gemini likes to have its finger in every pie. It likes to just constantly intake information, and Jupiter is all about expansion. So when you think about if we're constantly expanding, constantly looking at different sources of information, that's really overstimulating. And in some ways, it can almost be so much choice that it causes paralysis, which I think, again, paralysis in this card very potently depicted. So the challenge is that there might be so many narratives to listen to. How do we choose? And I know when I have a lot of options, sometimes that makes choice a lot harder. And I almost want people to choose for me, which, right, when we give people the power to choose, are they actually going to choose narratives or stories or ideas or structures that are in our best interest? So sometimes to avoid that challenge or discomfort of choice, we go along with just what already exists. But the beauty of this, and I think the positive framing of this card, is that there's so much possibility, right? Even if it's overwhelming, that opens up the, again, possibility that we can create our own narratives and ideas and liberate ourselves. So I think this card also is about that process of taking off the blindfold or unbinding ourselves to recognize our agency and our power. And there's a few other symbols in the card that I want to talk about. We talked about like the rope binding, but also this figure is touching water. And water in tarot is often associated with our intuition, our subconscious, our emotions. And so when our eyes are bound or when we have a blindfold, we can't rely so much on our sense of vision or our consciousness. This card is maybe a indication that we ground ourselves into our feelings or things that we know to be true, even if we don't have proof that they're accurate. And also in the traditional deck, there's usually a depiction of a castle in the background. In this card, you can kind of see an outline of some sort of city or castle, and castles are meant to protect people. That was the whole premise, is that they have this fortress where people could be secure and protected. And so I think having this imagery in the background calls into this question of, is binding actually security? What does security look like? Is it necessary? Does it come from somebody else, like a king or a kingdom? Is that really what's giving us security? What is it protecting us from? Uncertainty? Is it protecting us from our own agency? And then at that point, is it actually protection, or is it something that, again, binds us and makes us unaware of our own power? So I think the succinct message of this card is that we all have conscious agency and our minds can be avenues for liberation. Anything that you
Wow.
two would like to add?
That was so good. Seriously, I was like, oh yeah, like that's helping me to see this in such a different way. Cause I'm whenever I see the Eight of Swords, I'm always like, okay, like there's some sort of story or something that's keeping me trapped in this place. And I can't move past it. I can't move out of it for whatever reason, you know? But like, even just thinking about the tower in the background, the castle in the background, the city in the background, those structures, and like whether those structures are necessary, like providing necessary security, or can we release our attachment to what we think is keeping us secure in order to open ourselves up to more freedom, which is just like so potent for everything that we're like experiencing right now in the world, and also, you know, with our story connection for today. And I just love too how you were talking about Jupiter and Gemini, and like then you just had so many questions that you asked us. Like literally it was just all questions. And I think that's what today is going to be. Like, honestly, it's going to be a lot of questions to like ponder because we're dealing with Sagittarius and Gemini, which are two mutable signs, first of all. So they are moving and they both are in their different ways, like about our thoughts and philosophies and like, you know, the way that we form our understanding of the world via like a story and narrative and the language we choose and stuff like that. So really good job. That was awesome. Can you show the Eight of Swords card one more time? Just because
Yes.
I want everyone to take a good look at it. Should we move on to talking a little about Sag season in general?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start by just doing a basic overview of Sag season, Sagittarius, some of its connotations and symbols that are associated with it. So Sagittarius is a Jupiter-ruled sign. It's expansive, it's philosophical, it's a seeker of truth. It's symbolized by a centaur with a bow and arrow, pointing its arrow towards the center of the universe. Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign. So within astrology, the 12 signs are divided into 4 elements and into 3 different modalities. So I'll start with the element. The element fire is often connected with spirit, with passion, with energy. And the modality that Sagittarius is mutable. So we have cardinal, fixed, and mutable. These are associated with the seasons as well. So Sagittarius comes in between, in at least the northern hemisphere, fall and winter. And mutable signs are flexible and dynamic because they're responsible for transitioning. And they often have the elements of both of the seasons according to the months of the calendar. So in that case, Sagittarius has that like flexible, dynamic kind of energy. And then with fire, a little spicy, also interested in like passion and pursuing that. Like I said, symbolized by the archer pointing their arrow to the center of the universe, Sagittarius is a truth seeker. They are looking for something. They are orienting themselves in that way.
And I want to pause there really quick because I just want to throw something in about that. Like, it's interesting that it's a mutable fire sign. So fire, if you think about it, it's like that's an intensity. There's like a passion there, right? But it's mutable. So it's like I mentioned my Sagittarius friend last Astro Church episode, but like she's somebody who's like, she's a manifester. She makes stuff happen, you know, but then she's also like, don't look at me, you know, like, so it's like both things, but she's also like needs to be the center. You know what I'm saying? So it's such an interesting dynamic. And especially with Sag pointing its arrow to the center of the universe, seeking, like looking for truth, you know, like it's not like Gemini, which is like, I'm going to look here. I'm going to look here. I'm going to turn this rock up under. It's like, nope, I'm going this direction. And unless you give me a really good reason to believe that it's not there, like I'm going to keep going this direction, you know? So it's just such an interesting dynamic with it being mutable, but then also being this like kind of an intense focus, you know, energy thing.
I think Sagittarius too, the mutable can come up where if Sag is like, actually, I'm not going that way, I'm going to change course. It's really easy, at least in my experience as a Venus in Sag. Once I sort of make my mind up, I'm like, actually, redirect this way.
Well, they have to decide it though. That's the thing.
True.
Is it's like literally there's no changing a Sag's course. They are like, and then when I say a Sag, I'm not just talking about Sag suns. I'm talking about any Sag energy out there, you know? It's like they have to be the ones to be like, oh, nope, this is now my direction. Because you're right. Like all the Sages I know are go a bunch of different directions, but they usually are only doing one at once. It's like, this is my thing now, you know? And it's not quite like Gemini, which is like, they always have a bunch of little things, you know? It's like, Sag is like, you know, no, this is what I'm devoted to 100%.
There's a level of depth with Sagittarius that we don't get with Gemini. So I think that's where the arrow comes in, is that, okay, I'm going to go deep with this. And I know, Aryn, you're going to get into Sagittarius's ruler in a little bit, but that depth to me comes from Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius. What is the meaning? And going to maybe a more depthful, more profound level with something. But we also think about, at the same time, centaurs in mythology were nomadic beings. They never had one place truly to call home. They were nomadic and roaming across the lands. And so we do get that mutable fire energy where there's this restlessness And I think their Sagittarius energy really craves experience because it is fire. It wants those experiences that, again, light them up, bring them passion, get them excited, really activate that fire within them that they feel passionate about, but a craver of experiences and really able to point the arrow of I'm going to experience this, and then being able to kind of compost that mutability once they've really achieved that experience, got what they wanted to feel out of it, move or found the meaning in it. I think with Sag, it's really like finding the meaning in it. What is the meaning of this experience? How is this transforming me? How is this helping me understand my place in the world better, or just the world or the universe? Really, with Sag, the universe writ large. What is the meaning that I'm gleaning from this experience?
And how does it contribute to like my understanding of the world and my meaning of my life here? You know what I'm saying? Like that's I think a big piece of it is like, there's the whole like books like Sag reads books like bread, where it's like, that's a whole experience, you know, that they then incorporate as like part of who they are forever. You know what I mean?
I think that ties into this idea that because Sag is Jupiter ruled, and Jupiter is really all about understanding and philosophy. It's also the teacher, a leader, a preacher kind of archetype. Sagittarius is always looking for how do their experiences fit into their worldview. And because it's mutable, that worldview might constantly be shifting based on different experiences. Or you could also get the flip side where Sagittarius can be dogmatic, which is interesting given a mutable sense. I think probably one of the more dogmatic mutable signs where they can be kind of stubborn about their belief systems. And I think maybe that could just be because of that seeker energy, where they might be so set on their path that other experiences that might counter or challenge that path, it can be tricky. Also depends on people's other things in their chart too.
Part of that, and that's kind of what I was getting to earlier, or trying to get to earlier, why it's so interesting. Part of that is like Sag rules temperance in the tarot, and temperance is an integrative card. So like if you think about Sag having a full experience, being like, this is my thing now. I know this Sag who like, they were a singer and that was their thing, you know, and then they were a, you know, artist and that was their thing, you know, whatever. Actually, I'm saying that, but I know like 3 Sages that had that exact same trajectory in some way, where they were like, now I'm a musician, now I'm an artist visually, you know. And so anyways, but that never goes away once they've integrated it. Like once they've done the temperance process, that's where the mutable energy comes in. But once it becomes a part of their identity, there's still a fire sign. Like the identity for the fire energy is like so key and so important. And I do think they do hold on to like, once they've integrated an experience, I think that becomes a part of that identity and that like sacred flame energy that Sag is dogmatic about. Like they will not let anyone perceived or in reality like touch that flame. You know what I mean? Like that is very much protected and from any kind of like shifting, you know what I mean? Like again, it has to come from them.
Truly. So I just want to touch on Jupiter archetypes as well. And we can talk also about how in traditional astrology, Jupiter rules both Sagittarius and Pisces and manifests in different ways. So like I said earlier, Jupiter is the archetype of the teacher, mentor, a leader in that way, and also the preacher archetype, which makes sense, associated with religion and philosophies. Also, Jupiter is related to our belief systems, our stories. It's also connected to optimism as well, and luck. And a lot of Sagittarius placements sort of have that happy-go-lucky vibe, or the idea of like, you know what, things will just work out.
Joy from inside out.
Exactly. Jupiter in Sagittarius is more diurnal, which is an astrology term for like of the day or solar or conscious. So I see that a lot as like an external, like Jupiter and Sag being the wanderer who literally travels foreign lands or far reaching places. Whereas Sagittarius, but then we have Pisces. So Jupiter in Pisces is a more nocturnal expression. So maybe more internal, more seeking within like consciousness or intuitiveness. And both of them have this sorts of growth or expansion or optimism or truth seeking, but perhaps they go in different avenues. So I think of Sag with like a backpack ready to go on a journey, whereas Pisces might be like laying down and putting on something over their eyes, and they're going to go into their like interior realm where people can't see it, but it's magical and mystical and expansive in that way. And both energies are really, really important. And yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I was raised, my mom is a Sagittarius sun, Sagittarius rising, and a Pisces moon. So she's all Jupiter, and she's Jupiter in Taurus. So a very much like a manifesting Jupiterian energy. And just to kind of give this perspective, I think one thing I think about with Sagittarius energy, especially it's very prevalent with my mom, but I also have a coworker who is a Sagittarius sun, and they are two of the biggest cheerleaders in my life. Like just that, like, you can do whatever you set your mind to. I believe in you. Whatever your heart desires, I desire that for you, and I believe in you. And like, just truly that cheerleader. And like, my husband literally calls my mom like our cheerleader now, because that's how she always is. And that energy, it's just that Sagittarius is like the warm Jupiter. There's such a warmth to it. And I think of Sagittarius, it can be a wildfire out of control, but we live in the Northern Hemisphere. Our roots, even though Danielle is in New Orleans right now, but like Milwaukee is what connects the three of us. We really know cold, harsh winters. And that harsh winter really starts to set in during Sagittarius season. Even though it is the mutable sign, it's technically the last season of fall, but it's that double-bodied season where it's really fall giving way to winter. And I think of Sagittarius as like a hearth fire, like that's just like this warm kind of like space to like gather and just like feel really good in your body. You're gathering with your loved ones around the hearth this time of year. And so there's just kind of like with Sagittarius, just like a hearth fire energy to me.
And an abundance of food, feasting and having experiences and laughter, and also faith. I think of Jupiter in general as in both Pisces and Sag expressions as being about faith and like belief, what we have belief in, what we have faith in. And, Aryn, you mentioned Jupiter as the teacher or the preacher. I see the teacher with Sag and the preacher with Pisces, like it's the spiritual side of it versus but either way, I think Sag is also very spiritual. I think, there's a lot of like, leaders in all different ways. So not just the good guys, like there's also like a lot of dictator energy that has had Sagittarius, because again, it's about this like larger than life, something being bigger than oneself that we are devoted to, committed to, or not even committed. That's the wrong word. Not devoted. It's like that we're seeking out, and that we're trying to understand and maybe even like embody in some way, that kind of like larger than life energy. And obviously Jupiter is the expander of the zodiac. So it's got this like expansive energy, to it as well.
Yeah. I think Jupiter and especially Sag, they often are big picture thinkers. And then I think this is a good transition to talk about how when we understand planets or signs, we always have to look at what is in opposition. So Sagittarius is in opposition with Gemini. So these two signs form an axis and they inform each other in really important ways. And I think we can't really understand Sagittarius without talking about Gemini. So whereas Sag is big picture, seeking, sort of that exploration, Gemini is also exploration, but it has less of an aim. It's more of like taking in information and narratives and stories for funsies. At least that's how I see Gemini. Both of them have kind of like a jester, clown, like let's just have fun with this vibe. I think Gemini is, their seeking is more of just like, I'm just curious about this and I don't really know what I'm going to do with this information, but it's fun and I like it. And so both signs have this sort of curiosity, but Gemini is ruled by Mercury. And again, Mercury has this sort of like flighty, mutable, I go different ways depending on how I feel I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it's also one of the fastest moving planets.
It is, yeah.
Well, okay. So there's this like quickness to it.
Mhm.
Whereas Jupiter is obviously the gas giant and a bigger planet that takes a little bit longer. So Gemini is mutable in like an air sense too. So we have that fire and air opposition. Both of them fuel each other and interact with each other. But when we just look at like each of them individually, they have sort of different vibes. And what's interesting about this time right now is there's mutual reception between Jupiter in Gemini and Mercury in Sagittarius. So mutual reception is when planets are in the other ruler's sign. Did I get that right?
I think of it.
Yeah, the other sign. Yeah, go
They're
ahead.
swapping
Emily.
homes, right? Like they're in each other's homes. I
Mhm.
wrote about this in my newsletter
that's a
for
good idea.
those who ever watched the TLC Trading Spaces show, where it's like two friends swap each other's houses. They pick a room and they redecorate it, and it's a surprise. So it's like they're literally in each other's home. And then the other thing with mutual reception is they have to be able to see each other. And so that's where we get these aspects of astrology to play in. So they're in an opposition so they can see each other, and they're literally just in each other's homes opposite of each other.
Which is so that's so cool because you can have mutual reception with signs that aren't opposite, right? You could have like Mars could be in one of that's a bad example, one of Mercury's like signs, and then Mercury could be in one of Mars's signs, and they wouldn't necessarily be opposite of each other. But this is cool because we're in Sagittarius season, and then we have the ruler of Sagittarius season, which is Jupiter, because we always have a planet ruling each sign, right? Jupiter in the sky right now is in Gemini, which is opposite of Sagittarius, right? And then you have the Mercury, which rules Gemini, in Sagittarius. So they are, and they're opposite of each other. So it's actually really kind of a special and unique experience to have this mutual reception going on, specifically in Sag season in this opposition. And we just had Mercury retrograde. So like, you know, they have a big impact on one another.
Yeah, I think now would be a good time to get into some of more of the context of what's actually playing out in the sky, and then we can go deeper into this discussion of what's been happening this Sagittarius season. So just to kind of give everyone some dates, Sagittarius season this year in 2024 began on November 21st and ends tomorrow on December 21st. And then the sun will enter Capricorn and it'll be the winter solstice. So throughout Sagittarius season for about, this month, Pluto has been solidly in Aquarius. We have now at the very tail end of Scorpio season on November 19th, just, 2 days before Sag season, Pluto entered Aquarius for the next 20 years. So we are now in the era of Pluto in Aquarius. We talked about it during last month's Astro Church. We're going to continue talking about it. This Astro Church, it is just the collective energy, one of the big shifts on a collective level for the next 20 years. So this whole month, Pluto has been at 0 degrees of Aquarius. We also are still having some energy around this Mars-Pluto opposition. Again, we talked about this in Astro Church last month. We had Pluto at the 29th degree of Capricorn, and we had Mars at the 29th degree of Cancer. So we had this first opposition right before the U.S. election. Now, so this will actually be after Sagittarius season, but this energy is still, they're within an orb of each other. And so when we say within an orb, how I take that, and each astrologer is different, is the aspect that they're in, it's within 5 degrees of each other or thereabouts. So we have Mars in Leo right now, and Mars is actually retrograde within the first 5 degrees of Leo. So we have this opposition again, but this time it's Pluto in Aquarius opposite Mars in Leo. So we're having this story and this energy and this tension. It really is a huge tension. Oppositions are tense. It is like we are at odds with each other, but
especially between Mars and Pluto.
Yes, like Mars, the warrior, Pluto, the god of the underworld, death and rebirth and transformation. There's a lot of tension here that we'll get into. So we have another exact opposition between these two planets coming up on January 3rd. That will be in Capricorn season, but the energy is relevant throughout Sagittarius season. And then we have Mars retrograde. Mars is retrograde for Sag season in Leo, and in a few weeks or so, it will retrograde back into Cancer, but we'll just be talking about Mars in Leo. So Mars retrograde, Mars is our energy, our willpower, the fight that we have within us. I think about Mars as, if Venus is our desires, Mars is the action and the energy we put into achieving and obtaining and going after those desires. And so when Mars is retrograde, this can lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of stagnation, a lot of, I don't have the energy. I'm losing stamina. I'm losing willpower. Or maybe it is really more of a time of frustration, of needing more time to rest. So we'll get
quick temper.
Yes, also
quick temper
tempers
stuff,
flaring,
like regulation,
irritation, annoyance, aggravation,
inflammation, like even physical inflammation is a big Mars retrograde
Yes,
thing.
and Mars,
Anywhere where heat is trapped, anywhere where heat gets trapped
Absolutely.
is what I think about with Mars retrograde.
Mars just as a planet, one of their actions is to inflame. So that absolutely 100%. So the dates of Mars retrograde, Mars stationed retrograde on December 6th at 6 degrees of Leo, and will be retrograding into Capricorn season. And then the final big transit, which we've already kind of touched on, is this Jupiter in Gemini, and Jupiter is retrograde until February 4th of 2025. Jupiter in Gemini ruling Mercury in Sagittarius. And so we just concluded a Mercury retrograde period, and we're still seeing the effects of that because Mercury at this time is still in their shadow period. So, but just to give a little timestamp, Mercury stationed retrograde on November 25th. And then on December 5th, we had the Mercury cazimi. This is the midpoint. This will always be the midpoint of the retrograde period. And a cazimi is when the sun and a planet conjoin. And so that is when the sun and Mercury conjoined in Sagittarius. It's kind of like a rebirth, kind of like a clarity moment. And it marks the midpoint of the retrograde period. And then Mercury just stationed direct on December 15th, about 5 days ago. And now that Mercury is direct, they are now moving through the parts of Sagittarius that they just moved backwards. So this is the shadow period where it's like, okay, we've been through, this is now Mercury's third time going through this same area. And so that can show up in the collective energy, that can show up in our individual charts. So that is the astrology that we've been experiencing the Sagittarius season. So
can I just real quick recap? So we've got Mars retrograde in Leo, opposing Pluto in Aquarius at 0 degrees. So like they just entered, right? And the opposition hasn't fully happened yet, but we're kind of between Mars oppositions because Mars has been going retrograde, so it's going to go back over some things. But either way, we're within the orb, right? So we've got this Mars retrograde in Leo opposed Pluto in Aquarius, and then we've got Jupiter in Gemini retrograde opposed Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, which is that mutual reception thing that we were talking about, right? And we're done with Mercury retrograde now. Mercury's direct, but it's in its retrograde shadow, so it's still relevant. Should we talk about like what's going on in the world and how this kind of is being reflected?
Yeah, so we came up with some big world events that have been happening mostly in the United States, but some international stuff as well. And really our purpose of discussing these is more so to see how these astrological influences are played out. And oftentimes when we study big picture astrology, that it's less of getting into like the nitty gritty of like, oh, is this justified or whatnot? But like kind of like, what is this bringing up? especially for the collective with all this Plutonian Aquarius stuff going on. So the first big thing that we have is talking about Luigi Mangioni's case, which has really sparked a lot of conversation and I think in some ways clarity for a lot of working class people, where we're thinking about how the United States healthcare system is just not designed for us, that it's created or not created, but it's impacted by these billionaires who are prioritizing profits over people. And Luigi is sort of a manifestation of this like frustration of this pot boiling over. I think of him as very embodying that like Mars and Leo sort of energy.
Can we just give a little bit of context of the actual event that happened that he is involved in?
Yes, absolutely. So he was actually recently charged for terrorism for shooting and killing the CEO of the United Healthcare. Anything you guys want to add to that?
That he has not been convicted of anything. That specifically, he's been charged with terrorism and he's been charged with murder, but there's actually no, like, I think last I heard he was pleading not guilty. So I just want to say he's a suspect and he's charged.
Accused.
He has not been convicted with anything.
He's accused.
Yeah, exactly.
And United Healthcare is one of the largest private insurance providers in the United States. And there's been a huge internet reaction to this event. And that's what we'll get into a little bit, is just when Aryn was saying working class consciousness. Anyone who lives in America, we are forced into, kind of through subjugation, to be under this privatized healthcare system, unless you are someone who qualifies for Medicaid, which is our public insurance program for low-income individuals and people with disabilities, or the federal Medicare program, which is our government provided program for the elderly, people ages 65 and older. And then for the rest of us, we have private insurance, either through our employers. And one fact I wanted to share, because healthcare is my bread and butter. I got my degree in college in community health. I'm training to become an herbalist. Healthcare is really been a big part of my lived experience. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor. So now it's just kind of coming full circle. I'm really into community health, population health, but really public health and health prevention. But one statistic I learned recently, that in the state of Wisconsin, only 44% of employers offer private health insurance, employer-sponsored insurance for their employees. That is less than half. And so there are many workers out there, many people who do not have access to private insurance. And so just kind of give the landscape of healthcare in America. Then the option that they have, if they make too much to qualify for Medicaid, or if they're too young to qualify for Medicare, then we have the Affordable Care Act marketplace options, which would be like our freelancers. But again, in Wisconsin, 56% of people who have employers who just simply don't provide health insurance. So that's kind of the landscape. And with United Healthcare in particular, one of the biggest issues with these big kind of private insurance entities is that they deny care. And so that means if you have some type of condition, whether it is diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and you need a specific treatment or a medication, United Healthcare and a lot of these private insurance companies may deny, even if your doctor is saying this is medically necessary for your treatment to have a good quality of life, to treat this disease or this ailment. Private insurance has the power to deny access. And for that, it's financial access. They will deny and say, we will not pay for this treatment. And so one of the things we've learned with this event with Luigi is it's come out on social media. They've ranked all the private health insurers and the percentage of claims they deny for their consumers. United Healthcare was the top. It was at like 32% of claims are denied. Like, that is astounding. That is delayment in care, denial of care. That is thousands of people dying at the most extreme cases, or becoming sicker and unable to treat their disease.
It's a third of all of the people that are on United Healthcare.
Yeah. So that's my little soapbox and just little laying of the land of the healthcare system in America.
Well, and it really does reflect. It reflects Mars and Leo, but it also does reflect this Jupiter in Gemini, Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius stuff as well. Like I think these two oppositions are so interesting right now. This Pluto, I'm doing it based on my chart, but like Pluto in Aquarius and Mars retrograde in Leo, and then the Jupiter and Gemini oppose Mercury in Sagittarius. Like there's multiple stories going on. You look at the mainstream news and they're like, oh my God, like all these CEOs are scared for their lives now. And like, he was a terrorist and violence isn't the answer and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, true. Okay. Like I great. And then on the other side of it, you have this whole narrative coming out and this stuff being revealed to people, things we already felt. We already felt gaslit by the insurance system. We already felt all these things, but now we're seeing it before our eyes as a like mainstream conversation. And that's a completely different story than Luigi Mangione and whether or not he should have, done what he did, like that's a completely different thing. Like on the other side of it is this whole conversation and story around healthcare and people on, it's even turning the pages for some people on like being conservative versus liberal. And instead people are starting to go, oh, actually a lot of working class people, whether they're conservative or liberal, have the same concerns about this specific thing, and we actually agree with each other about this specific thing, talking about the healthcare system, what you all just went over, Emily. Like, no matter where we stand on the political spectrum, or religious spectrum or whatever, like we all need healthcare. We all need to be able to survive. You know what I'm saying? And so I do think it's a very interesting, like these two oppositions happening right now, and specifically around like propaganda and how the story is being told and who's telling that story. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think going back to the Eight of Swords of what stories do we inherit, and especially what's so fascinating to me about this situation is that shift of less emphasis on right and left, which is a divisive strategy of the ruling class, and more people coming to the consciousness of actually, wait, who is the enemy or who is the villain of the story? And I think what's so interesting too about the Mars and Leo stuff, is this idea of this performance. Like in some ways, Luigi is kind of the person in this performative kind of nature, where I already think the United States is very performative. I mean, look at like Trump, and we can talk more about that too, but there's this sense of audience and perception and how things are.
And he's hot. That's like something that's so Leo. Like it's like so Mars and Leo. Like everybody and he's bisexual too, so everybody is like, he's hot. I mean, I'm not, again, I want to stay away from the stories about, like, specifically about him and what he should or should not have done, like, and even making it about gun violence. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the only thing I do want to point out with that is that he's getting hit with terrorism charge, but people that commit mass shootings and in schools and stuff and in Black churches and whatever aren't and also haven't been hit with those charges. So
in the United States,
that is interesting.
How we frame different types of crime. Like when I was laying out United Healthcare as a private insurance entity, the amount of violence they cause, even though it's not framed as violence, it is violence when you are denying care, and that you are also a direct contributor in rising healthcare costs that are making access to healthcare so deeply inequitable and unjust and unaffordable. And the later we get into kind of late stage capitalism, the less access people have to life-saving healthcare, and that is violence. But in the mainstream media, we are never taught that corporations are violent entities because they do enact mass violence, in their striving for profit and for growth in their profit to go to their shareholders. But United Healthcare, most of our private healthcare agencies do have blood on their hands, one for denying treatment and causing this just steep rise in healthcare costs that makes so many people unable to access it.
Yeah, and they were doing this manipulative thing. I just saw a reel on it, and maybe you even shared this with me, Emily, I'm not sure, but United Healthcare specifically was doing a manipulative thing where they were delaying paying out doctors' offices, and then those doctors' offices would go under, and then United Healthcare's other arm that has doctors' offices was buying out these floundering private doctors' offices because they didn't get paid for their services. And so United Healthcare is literally doing this like extremely manipulative, like immoral, totally wrong thing. And by like essentially screwing over providers, and there's no mechanism in government to hold them accountable for that. Like there's literally nothing that can be, and this one man who killed one man and, or who was accused of killing one man, I should be very clear about that because I think that's important, is getting hit with a domestic terrorism charge. Okay. But then this entity, which is has human beings involved in it. Okay. Like it's not just this separate, thing. There's human beings up there that are making these decisions and that are doing these things to try to increase their own profit and their own greed. There's no holding them accountable. And we're supposed to somehow have empathy for these. Like you can't have empathy for people like, you know what I mean? So
there's such a double standard of who enacts violence, who is punished for it, what is actually seen as violence, what is actually seen as terrorism.
And the systemic structures that we have that uphold that, because again, we don't have a legal mechanism to hold these people accountable. Like they're within the law because they control the law, because they have the money to influence politicians to control the law, And that's the class consciousness that I think a lot of people are really starting to be like, meh, like I support, even like Trump supporters are like, yeah, we support Trump, but like also we need healthcare, like also this is wrong,
Yeah, we are all oppressed by this healthcare system. Obviously, there's different layers and different degrees of oppression depending on our just status in this capitalist, white supremacist society. But to some degree, we are all oppressed by this healthcare system. And that has really been Pluto and Aquarius really bubbling up to the forefront. But I really feel like Luigi's action embodies Mars and Leo, kind of like a almost like a martyr type of action, but it's really like rooted, like really resulted in this Pluto and Aquarius, just collective social online dialogue about we are all harmed by this privatized healthcare system here. We all have stories, we all have experiences, we all have loved ones and personal experiences negatively impacted by this healthcare system, and that is a uniting experience and narrative, no matter what our political beliefs are.
Speaking of other forms of oppression that impact us all, this is also the Copperwood Project and also the Line 5 pipeline. I believe, Dani, you mentioned it earlier too, with like the Great Lakes being potentially harmed by like oil companies. I just think that there's something really uniting too about if companies are harming our water systems, that's also something that impacts all of us, whether or not you're in the Great Lakes region. And I think like Pluto and Aquarius, and also like Uranus in Taurus, which soon will not be in Taurus any longer, but has been for I think like the past like 7 or 8 years.
7 years, about
7 years. So these environmental issues that have come up as well, and like indigenous sovereignty and the fight to protect like sacred land sources. I think that's just, it goes in tandem with what we're also talking about is there are so many issues that affect all of us, that there are policies that are making harmful decisions for the collective. So again, this theme with Pluto and Aquarius, even at 0 degrees, is like already sparking so much. It's honestly like astounding. I almost think about too how Pluto and Capricorn spent so much time exposing these like structures that do not benefit the masses. And so I almost wonder if that prime has really just created this like, let's hit the ground running in terms of Aquarius being associated with the collective, or the structures, or how the structures impact our collective well-being, and especially the ideologies and ideas that we like. Going back to the Eight of Swords, we inherit these ideas that like, oh, capitalism is the status quo, like this is what we are taught to value and believe. But then when people start to be like, actually taking my blindfold off and I'm seeing the truth and realizing these stories and these narratives don't actually benefit us as a whole, that's really powerful stuff.
Yeah. And also with the Pluto in Capricorn's the skeleton, the structures, patriarchy, whatever it was digging all that up. And I agree, it's been dug up. Like we can see it now. But in Aquarius, now it's disseminating the information. So it's like, and it's also revealing, being Pluto, it's revealing our power, revealing collective power, So like, again, showing people who thought of themselves so as the enemy is the, liberals or whatever, being like, oh, actually, all these leftists and I agree on this issue. You know what I mean? And we agree on more than they think most of the time. You know what I'm saying? So like, there is this like, and even leftists, like even how leftists have been shifting how they associate with people on the right, and specifically working class people on the right. Like there's a lot of push right now for leftists to stop being in their ivory tower elite stuff. Specifically the separation between people on the left and Democrats. You know what I'm saying? Like there's people breaking away from that, going, like, stop selling working people out. You know what I mean? Like we're not with you. So all people, I think, are starting to shift their consciousness. And I think Pluto and Aquarius has a huge piece of that already at 0 degrees. It's like beautiful to see, There's some other stuff going on too.
One more thing to add. So we've been talking also about Jupiter and Gemini and Mercury and Sagittarius. And I really think Mercury and Sagittarius, it's really about like, what are the mental constructs we have? Mercury of our larger belief systems, and with the retrograde, a reassessment of that. And this event happening within that retrograde period of maybe realizing that we actually have a lot more in common with the 99%, with people who may be Trump supporters and more right-wing in their beliefs. We actually have a lot more in common than we do different. And we really do share these experiences where they're, experiences that impact the collective. So it is kind of like a Mercury retrograde in Sag, a reevaluating of, okay, maybe we have more common ground, or just more shared experiences than we thought, because the people in power, they are served by sowing division, by creating these divides, by scapegoating, which we'll be getting into, and pitting us against each other and scapegoating. Obviously, in this day and age, like Trump, he is the biggest scapegoater of immigrants and trans people.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court case. I think that's an important piece. I think we can go a little bit over, but can we, Aryn, would you touch on that? Because you just mentioned scapegoating, Emily, and I think this is a perfect transition into one of the other things we wanted to talk about.
Definitely. So recently, the court case is U.S. v. Scrimetti. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's basically a court case that was taken to the Supreme Court on trans healthcare, specifically trans healthcare for youth. So there's been a lot of anti-LGBT trans bills that have been introduced. I believe for this court case, it originated in Tennessee, where there was a ban on like puberty blockers and also just a life-affirming healthcare for transgender youth. And this is like not a one-time thing. Like this is happening all over the country. So this is significant because one, trans healthcare is unfortunately a political hot topic right now. it is very scapegoaty as well, where it's like, actually, we have all these other problems and not trans people like having healthcare. Like that's actually not really a problem at all, but like politicians are using that as a platform. So it's significant in that way, but it also sets a precedent because if you have politicians that are trying to ban healthcare, like gender affirming, that can trickle down into so many different ways. Like in that case, like while trans people are targeted, that impacts everybody. And also cis people use gender affirming healthcare as well. It's not just
more
like
than trans people. Like
yes.
the statistics are that actually it's mostly cis people who get gender affirming surgeries and stuff.
So there you go. And also like there's not a lot of trans people in the world in comparison to cis people. So again, very scapegoaty, but I was doing some research on this case, and what's some really impactful things is one, there was oh my gosh, I'm not like fully versed on law terminology, but I believe like a lawyer who is openly trans defending this case, which is really cool and really powerful. Cool. There's also like a teen girl trans girl who is also involved in this case as well. And so I think on one hand, we have like the Jupiter and Gemini, Mercury and Sag, like that's very present of like the propaganda versus like the narratives and the truth. And then I also think like Saturn and Pisces is at play here. Saturn being our structures and our systems, and also Pisces being a sign that's really compassionate, that's spiritually tapped in. Also this sense of belief of like, do we have faith and belief in these systems that we have in the United States to protect our rights? And so right now the case is pending, I believe so. I couldn't find like a definitive answer of this, but there are, when I was researching the case, a lot of Supreme Court justices are like, they're kind of like, okay, like in terms of in opposition, like we should ban it, because they're kind of like, but you're making this about sex, and in the Constitution, we have protections against discrimination against sex. And so it's complicated right now. And I think it's actually kind of affirming and interesting to hear even some of these conservative Supreme Court justices be like, is this actually constitutional? So that was sort of, I think the case happened earlier this month. So more updates to come on that, but it is a really big and impactful thing to happen. And for, the Supreme Court to have a say in this, because what they decide could have a really big impact in healthcare accessibility, not just for trans people, but for everybody.
Yeah. And again, it touches on the stories that like how they're told, who's telling them, like, even like the court having to decide between what story is going to be the story that moves forward. Like, yeah, it's pretty interesting Sagittarius season. Do we want to look at Trump's chart?
I have two things to add for the So the lawyer, their name is Chase, and they are the first openly trans lawyer to ever present in front of the Supreme Court. And again, openly is the key word there.
Amazing.
But that is historic in and of itself. So I know their first name is Chase. I forget what their last name is, but yeah, universal shout out to Chase. And then just pulling in the Mars and Leo. I just can't stop thinking about Mars and Leo opposing Pluto and Aquarius. I'm now kind of seeing everything through this lens. Mars and Leo fighting for bodily autonomy, fighting for freedom of self-expression, Leo, and, gender affirming care. That is part of freedom of self-expression. And Mars and Leo, this is one individual person's court case, right? Like the teen girl, that is like an individual experience, Mars and Leo, opposing something that is more collectively impactful, Pluto and Aquarius, the rights of all trans people, but also like you touched on, gender affirming care is not just for trans people, it's for everybody. So again, just wanted to hone in on that. But let's take a look at Trump's chart.
And the reason we chose to look at Trump's chart is partially because he has this Gemini Sagittarius thing going on in his chart. But also because he is a bombastic trickster ruler who tricks people and uses propaganda and language to manipulate people. And that goes really well into our story connection, which we'll talk about after we talk about Trump's chart. Cool. What are we looking at? Do we have the transits on this
Yeah,
too?
so let's point out his chart first. So just to orient people who are newer to natal charts, this is Donald Trump's natal chart. So here we have this AS is the ascendant. He is a Leo rising. And here is Mars. We've been talking about Mars in Leo. Trump has Mars in Leo conjoined the ascendant natally. And he is of the Pluto in Leo generation as well. So he has a lot of intense energy.
The worst.
In the first house. Yeah. And Pluto in Leo is square those of us millennials, Pluto in Scorpio. So there is a deep tension between these two generations.
And that's like boomers.
So
that's like one of the boomer
that's
generations.
actually technically incorrect. It's actually the silent generation because I've done a lot of digging. We think of baby boomers.
But my mom is a Pluto in Leo solidly, and she's a boomer. Like she's solidly
so
a
I
boomer.
think some boomers probably have Pluto in Leo.
Because boomers have a crossover with the Pluto generations. Because boomers are both Pluto in Leo and Pluto in Virgo. Like if you look at and I do think the Pluto and Leo stuff did influence the baby boomers because they are so self-involved. Anyways.
So then we have Trump has his sun. Here's his sun at 22 degrees of Gemini. And he was actually born during an eclipse. We see the North Node here closely conjoined his sun. He was born during a full moon eclipse, a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. And so he was born on a full moon, and it wasn't just a full moon, it was a freaking eclipse. That is very intense energy in astrology. So he has his moon at 21 degrees of Sagittarius, opposing his sun at 22 degrees of Gemini, conjunct his south node right here. So he has heavy Gemini Sagittarius energy. And now I'm going to add the Gemini full moon that just happened during Sagittarius season. So we have Trump's chart on the middle wheel here, and then the transit of the Gemini full moon in the outer ring here.
Okay, so he's got Mars conjunct Pluto, like transit Mars within a 5-degree orb of his Pluto.
Yep, right here. So here we have Mars in the sky. Yeah, conjoining his Pluto.
Which Pluto is a powerful position. And in full house astrology, which is what Emily is sharing right now, that means that he has Pluto in his first house, which is a very powerful and intense placement. It's like, if you imagine Pluto is like where you have your power, but also where you experience deep transformation all the time, to have it in your first house, like where your rising sign is, it means that you are a Plutonian energy person, and that is what people are seeing when they see you. So if you think about like Plutonian energy people, they trigger people, they activate people, they have a lot of power and sway and influence over people. So for him to he's a very controversial figure. Like some people like are so obsessed and devoted to him, and some people are like completely appalled and triggered by and he is an exposer. Like whatever you want to say about Trump, like he does expose a lot of what's wrong with our society. You know what I'm saying? Like not just in his actions, like consciously exposing stuff. I even mean just like the frenzy around him exposing the like racism, the stories that are told like at a folk level about the United States. Like there's so much that, you know, he's been involved in exposing. And then to have this like transiting Mars going over it, it's, you know, this Mars retrograde, you know what I'm saying? It's a very like, it's activating that power that he has, you know, it's activating that triggering nature, that transformative nature that he has with that Pluto placement.
Especially given the fact that since he's a Leo rising, also 29 degrees with rising, wow. And then so his sun is his ruler, and his sun is in Gemini. And that's also tapping into that eclipse. His sun is in the 11th house. The 11th house is of audience. Like it makes so much sense to me that he is somebody who craves attention, power in spaces, and that even he's associated with like even belief systems too. Because then you also have Jupiter right now in Gemini, which is retrograde at 15 degrees, is transiting that part of his chart, and it's right by his natal Uranus, and Uranus is really close to his sun as well. So like, I think when Uranus and the sun are conjoined, I also kind of have that placement too. It's somebody who's like their energy and their sort of how they present themselves is so fast moving. Like Uranus is a disruptor. And so you can have people like him who are a disruptor in maybe more negative ways. And you can also have that archetype. Like within myself, I kind of see myself as somebody who like likes to test the boundaries of what identity means. And so I also think it's helpful to say that we're looking at somebody's chart, but just because you might share some of these placements, does that mean that you are like destined to become like a populist fascist leader? Like this is just how
I have Pluto in my first house, so just saying.
Yeah. Like we can see how these energies can impact someone's expression, but ultimately people make choices. And ultimately he is a person who was born into wealth and power, who has made the decision to utilize like these more negative agendas or self-serving agendas. So
and it being in Gemini too, like it's and his moon being in Sagittarius opposite it, because that it makes such an impact, and it being conjunct the north and south nodes, like respectively, is just, and so it in Gemini, like again, we've been talking so much about who controls the stories, who's telling the stories, what words are being used, like truth social, that's some disruptor Gemini energy. Like all of his stuff about just changing the narrative whenever he wants. Like that is some disruptor, trickster Gemini energy. Like it's manipulative, it's narcissistic, it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not something that is like super healthy. You know what I'm saying? It's not a healthy expression of it, because there can be healthy expressions of it. But in this way, like he uses his disruptor energy via this Gemini lens of like words, language, like also using popular, like local language, like that people will understand. That's very Gemini compared to like Sagittarius, which is like more philosophical and stuff. You have the Gemini energy of like keeping it real, keeping it down to earth, like communicating in a way that the populace is going to respond to, because that's how they talk, stuff like that.
All right.
Anything else about this chart? I know that we're kind of over time.
Can I just say, I wanted to point out Uranus right now in Taurus at 24 degrees is right on top of his midheaven. The midheaven in astrology is like our legacy, our public image. It's oftentimes associated with career, but our legacy isn't always our job. I think maybe in Trump's case, it could be just because it does place a lot of emphasis on the things he does and how that it contributes to his image. I don't necessarily have anything to like
well, and it's in Taurus, which is about wealth.
Yeah.
It's about resources, and he is a wealth hoarder. He is like, and he's somebody who somehow like has lost a bunch of money, but people still think he's smart in business. You know what I'm saying? So like there's, and he's going to have, his job is going to have huge impacts on our environment, which is the other thing we were mentioning about the Copperwood Project and Uranus being in Taurus. And Uranus rules Aquarius in modern astrology, and Pluto is in Aquarius right now, transforming things. So this Uranus and Taurus final lap that it's making, like in Taurus before it moves into Gemini next year, like it's being impacted and impacting the Pluto and Aquarius energy that's happening as well. And his midheaven being there, like, yeah, his figurehead energy is going to have a huge impact on our environment. So, and our financial systems. Anything else we want to say about Donald Trump's chart? So can we talk about Wicked? Okay. So to be transparent, Aryn hasn't seen it yet. So I'm sorry, Aryn, that we're maybe ruining it for you a little bit. Okay. But both Emily and I have like childhood connections. For me, it was my teenage years connections to Wicked. And it's just a really special thing. And I honestly had like put it aside, because my Glinda, like my bestie in high school, and I like had a falling out, and it made me put Wicked aside after that. Like, that was in high school. It was a long time ago. She and I are cool now, but like at that time it was like too painful. And so now when I saw it on Tuesday, I was like, oh my God, I forgot like about this. So I've been kind of obsessively thinking about Wicked and how it connects to Sagittarius, how it connects to Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini, and also this Pluto Mars opposition. So first of all, we're talking about storytelling and propaganda. Like, Wicked is a retelling of a story we all already know from the perspective of the villain. So it's a retelling of the Wizard of Oz from the perspective of a villain. So already the whole idea behind it is to subvert the narrative that already exists, okay? And make the antagonist the protagonist and explain her motivations and why she became the Wicked Witch of the West. And so, you know, throughout the whole story, the lyrics to the songs, like everything, the very first word that anybody says or sings is good news. She's dead, you know? And so there's this understanding of like, we're going to be talking about good. We have Glinda the good, and we're going to be talking about wicked, right? We have the Wicked Witch, right? And what that means and who is good. And Glinda, very close to the very beginning of the story, she's telling everyone that the Wicked Witch is dead. And she says, are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? And that's kind of what I'll probably be emotional throughout this, but that's kind of like what this story is about. It kind of mirrors our societal beliefs a little bit about like what good versus bad is. You know, they're always like, dear Glinda, you are just too good. Like, goodness knows, you know, like there's all this stuff about good. There's a point in when the main dude character, which I just want to say, I totally forgot he existed. And that tells me what my mindset was as a teen. Like, it was more about the friendship between the two of them and the politics than it was about this love story that they try to throw in there. I know that's probably not true for everybody, but I just was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, it's not all about the man in this situation, but there is this character, Fiyero, who is loved by both girls, and he loves both girls in different ways. And at some point, Glinda's being very manipulative. She's doing it because she's good, you know? So she's like, she's getting this guy Bach, who has a crush on her, to ask this girl out who is disabled and is like, whatever. Glinda thinks she's doing something nice for this girl by getting Bach to ask Nessa out. And Bach is only doing it because he's in love with Glinda. So like, it's very manipulative and whatever. And so she does this whole thing. She's like, oh, Bach, if you really like me, then you'll go ask Nessa out, you know? And Fiyero is watching her and he goes, you're good, you know? And that line of like, you're good, like, you're good. Is he saying, you're good, like you're doing something kind? Or is he saying, you're really manipulative and good at what you do, being manipulative, you know? It's a very, very poignant, small thing that I noticed that I was like, just the way they use these words throughout the story to subvert their own narrative that they're telling, you know, throughout it. And, you know, talking about the Eight of Swords too, how, like, part of the are people born wicked, or did they have wickedness thrust upon them conversation, Elphaba, who's the Wicked Witch of the West, that's what she's called in the story, Elphaba, Elfie, she is born green, so she is outcast from the beginning, and she's actually born out of an affair. So her mother has an affair on her father, and then her mother dies a little while later in childbirth of her sister. And so her father blames her for her mother's death, and her father also doesn't love her in the way that she deserves to be loved, because she's the result of an affair that was painful for him, and she's green. Okay. So she's raised to kind of be like the caretaker nanny for her younger sister, and grows up with this belief that she is bad somehow, that she is wicked, that she's isn't deserving of the same opportunities as other people. and that she's responsible for all the bad that's happened in her family and in her life. So she has these imposed beliefs. And then on the other side, you have Glinda, the good, who has these imposed beliefs about needing to be good. Even that, this is very like white woman archetype. We need to be good. We need to be liked. We need to be pretty. We need to be small. We need to be, and Glinda represents all these things, right? And when they get to school, some of those narratives that people start noticing how powerful Alphaba is. And Glinda, she's raised under this high pressure, probably like wealthy family that has a lot of power. And she goes in there being like, I'm Glinda. She's dressed in pink. Everyone else is dressed in gray. Like she's like, the hottest man who's a prince, Fiero, is supposed to be my boyfriend. I'm supposed to get the best internship. I'm supposed to go work with the wizard, like she's like, I deserve all these things. This is what is meant for me. And then she has this green person come in being like actually super just raw talent and power, who ends up getting the opportunities that Glinda wanted. And so Glinda has this thing at first where she's jealous and she's angry, and it makes her manipulative, which is so like Mars retrograde energy in Leo, because it's like this like Leo energy of like so charming. So she's sunlit, she's golden, she's pink, she's, like all this stuff. And then she comes in and she doesn't get to be the star. She doesn't get to be the one. And so in like a retrograde sense, she reacts in mean ways. She ends up being mean, to Alphaba. I want to pause because I've been talking a lot. So, Emily, I don't know if you have, because you're also a big Wicked fan. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to share in there.
Yeah, I think you've given a really good overview of like the story. So thinking about like the astrological archetypes, when I went to go see the movie Wicked a couple weeks ago, and yes, I think Wicked was probably the first musical I ever saw live. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, and had the soundtrack on my iPod Nano back in middle school. So this was totally just such a nostalgic experience. And yeah, just having all of the lyrics come back to me. And I love the wordplay that you've been pointing out, Dani. The wordplay is just like so Mercury, like wow, like so just magical and so trickstery, and just like the nuances, all the multiplicities of the meaning of the word good. So some of the astrological themes, like Dani said, when I was watching the movie, I was like, this is such a clear like dichotomy to me of Glinda is Leo, Alphaba is Aquarius. And then we even think about like binaries and polarities, good versus wicked, Leo versus Aquarius. Like they kind of are on this, kind of binary system, but there's a whole, breaking down the binaries, there's a whole fluidity and spectrum between those two, but you can kind of see those as those polarities. And so some of the experiences of Aquarius is like being ostracized. Alphaba was, because of her green skin, extremely ostracized for the color of her skin, and really put on the margins and really disdained. And in the school experiences, Glinda, Leo, the center, the sun, everything revolves around the sun. Really just all her classmates are like infatuated with her. Glinda, you're just too good. They're all very disdainful towards Alphaba. So just wanted to start weaving in like the Leo and the Aquarius energy that is very in play in this musical.
Well, so we've been talking about these oppositions. We got Leo and Aquarius, and then we've got the Sagittarius Gemini opposition happening. And I think those are both in play I agree with you. Glinda's very clearly like a Leo character, and Alphaba, who ends up foregoing connection to stand in her principles, which is such an Aquarius thing to do, and to stand for the collective, what she knows to be right for the collective. At the end, she defies gravity. She says goodbye, and she becomes the Wicked Witch because she's fighting fascism, essentially, and violence and scapegoating that's happening. So I agree with that. But then also there's this element of Jupiter energy, which again, we talked about Jupiter being the teacher. They meet at school, okay? They have these authority figures throughout the story that are giving them stories to work with and to believe in, And, at the very end of the whole thing, at the end of the second movie, it will be at the end of the musical, they sing this song called For Good. And it's again, more good stuff. But they end up saying, because I knew you have been changed for good. And they both have been, very much changed. At the beginning, when they come with all these inherited beliefs and inherited stories, and they're different from each other, but they are all within the same paradigm that's like accepted by the broader world. And through their friendship with one another, they start to understand more about themselves, more about the world that they live in, and they start to have choices presented to them. And that's where I think these characters, these Mars and Aquarius, or these Mars and Leo and this like Pluto and Aquarius characters, they choose very differently from one another because they're very different archetypes, But essentially the two of them, it's a relationship. Like they're kind of breaking free, both of them breaking free, or in Glinda's case, maybe getting further entrenched in the inherited stories and narratives that were passed down to them, and that also are being presented to the broader world. Because as soon as, at first the wizard is like, oh, Elphaba, we love your power. You can totally read this grimoire. Like, you can do all these things for us. You're awesome. Great. And she's like, I absolutely am not going to help you commit violence against the animal population. Like, I'm not doing that. So she leaves. Within minutes, there's broadcasting across Oz about the Wicked Witch, this terrible terrorist person who did this horrible thing. And they're saying, oh, she was just jealous of her friend Glinda. So they lift up Glinda in this way to be like, oh, Glinda's always been the good, but Glinda's always been the best, even though they had initially like rejected her because she doesn't have the same kind of power that Elphaba has. So it is very astrologically, like, I see these characters as the Mars in Leo and Pluto and Aquarius energy. And then also they exist in the context of this like Sagittarius, Gemini, Jupiter, Mercury thing going
so
on.
some of the stories that are being told in the world of Oz is one that the wizard is all powerful and benevolent, that he is a good, and he is the leader of Oz. He's kind of that president, that, that government leader, authority figure. But really he's a con man. He uses this huge iron metal I don't even know what to call it, but like this, basically
it's the talking head that we know about Oz. Yeah.
And it's very like when Elphaba and Glinda go to Oz together to meet the wizard for the first time, they see this very imposing talking head, and then he comes out and he's just a man. So
we see that in the Wizard of Oz too. So in the Wizard of Oz, he's exposed as a fake in the Wizard of Oz. It's just not framed in a way that's like negative in any way, But in Wicked, it's framed as like, how would someone be able to get away with a con like that? Like the most wonderful wizard, like blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like he would have to manipulate people. He would have to use other people. Like he would have to divide and conquer the working class. You know what I'm saying? Like he would have to do all those things to get to that place because he is a con man. And again, like we just looked at Trump's chart, like we see this Sagittarius Gemini, like being able to manipulate and use language and words and story and, narrative to be able to manipulate people, divide and conquer people, stuff like that. But then unlucky for Trump, the only thing unlucky for Trump is that Pluto is in Aquarius now. And so people have more access, in my opinion, to the truth. They like people have more access to their power, and that's what's going to be revealed over this time. But that's not without a fight from, the people in power, like it's not like it's going to be easy, but definitely like, with what we were talking about before with like Luigi Mangione case and even with the Copperwood mine and stuff like that, like there is a shifting happening. amongst the collective, amongst the working class. That's like, actually, who are we aligned to, and what stories are we believing in? It doesn't mean we're there necessarily, but I do think the Alphaba waking up piece of it, to like, she wanted to work with the wizard. She loved the wizard. She goes to the wizard, and he's this terrible person that is committing atrocities. And so, like, her waking up to that is also Pluto and Aquarius, in that, like, we, the working class, are also waking up to that,
Yeah. And it's the Eight of Swords, like you kind of mentioned. It's shattering those beliefs, like living within the city of Oz and really being indoctrinated into the propaganda, the stories about the Emerald City, the benevolence of the wonderful Wizard of Oz. And then, and being in a school that also perpetuates those ideologies and those narratives. So other institutions in society uplifting those narratives and those stories of the state. And then having the experiences, and really it's the experiences with Alphaba, is she forms a connection with one of her professors who is a goat. And the people and the beings in the Wizard, or in the Wizard of Oz and in Wicked, that are being marginalized and oppressed are the animals. And so Alphaba, like, she really starts to see that the wizard is actually harming these animals, and he is really,
something bad is happening
something
in Oz.
very
Something
bad.
bad.
Yes. And so the animals are getting repressed, and they're losing their ability to speak, and they're being imprisoned. And that is what awakens Alphaba to say, hey, like, this is not actually right. Like, what is actually going on here? And it's that relationship that she has as a marginalized person herself, being so ostracized and marginalized by her own father, by her classmates, by society writ large, because she's green. And then really aligning with the animals who are also being oppressed and marginalized for being animals. And how dare they have positions of power and influence in society and be teachers. And so she, because of her own marginalization, can deeply empathize, whereas Glinda can't empathize with her professor. She has a hard time with that.
She does, but okay. So Glinda is a complicated one, because here's the thing with her. Like, they both, what brings them together and unites them is that they both want to be happy. I hope you're happy. I hope you're happy. And so, and they talk about this happiness thing, right? And at the same time, they both do have an ideal world. They're both teenage girls, and they both have this, like, ideal world in their head when they get to school, what they see as what the world is. And the thing with Glinda is that she just cannot let go of the false reality that she's created in her head. Like, she doesn't have the same relationships that Alphaba was able to form. And part of that is because Alphaba comes in with green skin, being an ostracized person who sees other ostracized people and is like, knows how to build a relationship with them. Whereas Glinda comes from privilege, and she does not even know like, she's a teenager. She has no idea that even to build those relationships. I think we see glimpses of her empathy, though. And specifically because Alphaba is the one that shows her, oh, I should, like, there's another experience to consider here, which is, again, very Leo Aquarius dichotomy of, like, being like, oh, like, not everyone is like me. Like, that's a human being who I'm treating like this, when there's a scene where she gives this hat, the iconic Wicked Witch hat, like, she gives it to Alphaba because it's ugly, but she's like, oh, you're both so smart, like, you should wear this. And she's jealous. She's jealous of Alphaba. She's being manipulative. She's being mean. And then Alphaba shows up and she thinks she's looking good in this hat, and she thinks it's, like, cool. And she starts, like, everybody's, like, pointing and laughing at her. And Glinda's like, oh, sorry, And then she starts to see, like, Alphaba is extremely, like, hurt by this, and it's not okay. And Glinda's been living with Alphaba throughout this time. So, like, this is when she shifts, and she's like, oh, that was mean of me. And I don't see myself as a mean person. I see myself as a good person. So I shouldn't be like this, A. And B, she does have legitimate empathy for Elphaba. Elphaba starts dancing and is dancing alone, and people are like, what is going on? And then Galinda joins her and starts mirroring her. That's why I said mirrored dances. It's one of the most beautiful scenes in the movie because Galinda joins her and they do this like mirrored dance together, and then they become best friends, you know? So I just I don't want to I do think it's important to identify Galinda's privilege and that she is doesn't choose the right path in the story. She really doesn't. And also it's understandable based on the paradigms and dichotomies where she comes from. And she's not an evil person. Like, she does have empathy. She loves her friend. She just legitimately believes that this is the way to get to happiness, to get to the goodness that she sees.
She's a product of her environment.
Because Defying Gravity is the song, I wanted to say one of the first, holding space to the lyrics of Defying Gravity, one of the first things they say is unlimited, together we're unlimited, because Elphaba tries to convince Glinda to come with her. And she knows that together, this is a very Aquarius thing, knows that together the collective energy has a lot of power. So I just want to say, working class consciousness, together we're unlimited. Okay, that's it. So our personal reflections. So we'll just leave you with this. We don't really have enough time to answer this all ourselves, but we'll leave this with you. We wanted to provide a question. So going over Sagittarius season, Jupiter, Mercury, Pluto, Mars, and the Eight of Swords. Are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? How do the beliefs and stories that you've inherited shape how you see yourself and the world? What old narratives are holding you back? And how might letting go of them help you step into your true power? And how could this shift also create positive change for the collective? If you want to share your thoughts with us, go ahead. Our email is soulconnectionspod@gmail.com. You can send it to us and let us know if you want us to quote you on the next episode. Okay. That's it.
All right. This has been our second Astro Church episode, third episode of Soul Connections. Thank you for being here. Until next time.